Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sicut erat in principio et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Ecce advenit Dominator Dominus, et regnum in manuus, et potestas et imperium. This part of the Christmas cycle has caused a certain amount of puzzlement in the minds of the wise men of the West, ourselves. Let's look carefully. Is this actual historical fact or not? The Gospels are amongst the most reliable of contemporary historical accounts that we have. Matthew was one of the apostles, an eyewitness. He wrote, we are told, by St. Jerome in Hebrew. The original has not come down to us, but the complete version in good Greek has, and it is the present Gospel of St. Matthew. In the Gospels, there is a clear distinction between forms. A parable is a story. There are some parables that are actual reflections of contemporary events. A king and so on, a person going to gain a kingship at a distance and being told he's not liked when he's away. And then whoever this Dives, this rich man was, going into the beyond and leaving a poor man, Lazarus, on this side alive, or rather the other way around, Lazarus being consoled and Dives in trouble. They may be in some way linked with historical figures, we don't know. Here, there is no question of an illustration. It is given as fact, and moreover, there are other bits linked there too. So let's look. The figure of Herod is described in psychologically accurate terms. Look what's going on here. Inquire diligently and find out where he is, that I too may come and pay him homage. Ha, ha. It's exactly how the human mind works and how it disguises itself. And they actually fell for it because they were going to go back to him. And they had to be warned in a dream not to do so. What happened then? An objective historical fact, this massacre of the Holy Innocents. Fact and history. Probably it wasn't a huge number. The historians calculate it would have been around 30. The number of children born in that limited area in a period corresponding to what we're talking about, a couple of years. But it's enough. What happened then? We have the fact that there is no smoke without fire. In the East, many traces are left in places and relics with living traditions. And because of the cross-fertilization between East and West, especially in the early centuries, things found their way also to the West. Where was Pope Benedict on World Youth Day? He was in Cologne, comes from a Latin word, colonia. And there he was in the place where the relics of these three kings, Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar, are to this day. A glorious cathedral in the heart of Europe. There is no smoke without fire. Now, we have very curious traces of early Christianity in the East. And the fact of their coming there is not without significance. We forget the powerful East in the creation of Christianity as we don't know it, because we forget it. But if you want to see history, drift towards a cloud of Eastern incense. And by the way, I nearly brought with me the thurible that I got from the Holy Land with all the bells and everything this day. I used it at 7 o'clock in the morning, and it does put us in that Eastern ambit. Full-length censer, used always that way. Actually, used in the Carthusians as well, the same thing, because there's a cross-fertilization there between East and West and the Carthusian Rite. And it suggests also, actually, pre-Christian worship, the temple, and also something which perhaps these three kings used. I make a jump. Although it's not evidence, it's not without relevance. We have a help with regard to historicity also in the mystical sphere. Have you heard of Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich? She had great lights in these visions that she saw and which were written down by Clement Brentano at her bedside. She was a victim soul. And she was shown, scene by scene, the Gospel and the Passion, and even actually the life of Our Lady and the beginnings of the Apostolic Church. And these scenes help us to pick out things which perhaps we would not even think of. What's going on here? These were possibly Zoroastrians. Therefore, they did not have a complete faith. But they came because the Lord got through to them there where they were of goodwill, and we don't know exactly what happened, but somehow the Lord used their context and used language they could understand to bring them to greater fullness. But they weren't quite at the fullness when they got there. And we have this interesting intuition given to this mystic that what actually happened was this. The infant Jesus gladly accepted this worship, which was not complete, because it was the best they could do. And I think if there's anything we can take with us on this day, it's at least that. Don't let us be more closed-minded than the Holy Spirit. Our God meets people where they're at, and we have to do the same. Never aggress or talk down to, but get into and talk with. That's the starting point. And so, they had complete prostrations, genuflections, possibly kissings, which is their language, which is actually still in the East. And the Lord received it, and on they went, back on their long, long journey to the Far East. I make a jump. In our time, there are many expressions of worship. I've seen a different form of it on my travels. First of all, we have the difference between continents and cultures within the Catholic or Orthodox Christian world. I've had and still have big links with Romania. And when you celebrate in Romania, in the Catholic rite, they talk about the divine liturgia. Catholics now, influenced by the East. And I noticed a great gestuality and bodily dignity in their prayer, these nuns, and also coming always on the tongue, always kneeling, and certainly an influence from the East there. Time and otherness. Osmosis, cross-fertilization, in a good way. Which is, by the way, what Benedict XVI hoped for, so the introduction everywhere of the old rite again. A cross-fertilization, a mutual osmosis. But let's go further. Within what has come from the Catholic tradition after already the division in 1054 between East and West, we have bits of ourselves coming out. Luther starting to go his own way, 1517, 1521, and then what goes after him, eventually the great influence of Luther on England, and therefore actually bits of Ireland. What happened there? Unlike the East, they lost the real thing. They lost the real presence because they had no more transmission of the priesthood. But the bits they kept, they still have, and because they are sincere quite often, the Lord accepts that because it's the best they can do. And I remember growing up in Wales, I noticed, because a child is not an idiot in this thing, he has this awareness of what's sincere and what isn't. I could see when our preacher was going into intense mode of prayer, and man said to me one day in Welsh, "You can always tell a sincere preacher by the way he prays." That, by the way, I would leave with you when you're saying your rosary at high speed. Healthy osmosis. But then, when it came to the itch to go perhaps to something more Catholic, because the thing was there, one thing that kept me for a while, and it's this. It's not the noisy noise that you get in now modern jazzed up worship, but the powerful filling of a church with true beauty, with the best that we have. I mean now in nonconformist Wales. I remember on a Sunday evening, it was even for a child something extremely moving to hear at the end of the hymn singing in the evening, after a great sermon, the great organist pulling out all the stops and getting the whole chapel to rock. An earthquake of glorious well singing. That was sincere without being jazzed up. It was coming from the heart, and I'm sure the Lord was glad to hear it. Compare that with our hi-fi systems, bombarding our altars with jazzy, shabby work of the latest and shoddiest order for the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Healthy osmosis. It's good sometimes to have our eyes open and to have a certain culture, even in the Christian world. I finish. We, as Catholics, have the greatest treasure given to mankind. I've heard from several Protestants, actually, do you know Ian Paisley himself said this? If we had what you believe in, we would be in church all day. That's interesting. And when the shock of the real presence first hits a Protestant, he can do nothing but kneel and adore. And I remember the first time that I went into a Catholic church, having somehow copped on that there was something there, something said inside me, kneel. And I gazed at the box, and I somehow knew this is it. So if that's there, all the rest will follow. And it's not a question of either or, but taking all the best of what is out there and giving it to this greatest treasure. So how can we give too much attention to what we have before us, hidden as a child in our waters? Magnificat anima mea Dominum, et exultat in spiritus meus, in Deo Salvatore meum, quia respexit humilitatem avantius et in expropriata medicendum generationes, via fecit mihi Maria qui potentes, et sanctum nomen eius, et misericordia eius in progenies et progenies, cimentibus eius, et fiat potentiam in patrio suum, dispensum tuttibus necessibus sui, se posum et potentes desere, et exaltabit humiles, es orientes eu plebet bonis, et divites dimisit in annes, suscepit Israel puerum suum, recordatus misericordiae, sicut locutus est ad Patres nostros, Abraham et semini eius in saecula. Gloria Patri et Filio, et Spiritui Sancto, sicut erat in principio et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Tribus miraculis ornatum diem sanctum Colimus. Odies stella magos duxit ad praesepium. Hodie vinum ex aqua pactum est ad nuptias. Hodie in Jordane a Ioanne Christus baptizare voluit, ut salvaret nos. Alleluia. Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison, Kyrie eleison. Pater noster, qui es in celis, sanctificetur nomen tuum,